Hello, this is Barney Treadway again with another installment of the Sommelier certification standards. In this episode, we're going to take on the nasty creature that is wine and food pairing. As a sommelier, everyone expects you to pair wine for them, and it's a very tricky beast. She may be having pomegranate vegetarian quinoa, and he's having steak au poivre, and you've got to find a wine to work with both. Trying to somehow objectify the pretty much completely subjective nature of personal taste is a slippery slope. Many of us spend our lives trying to develop this skill, only to find our preconceived notions blown away by wines that should work, that don't work, and wines that do work, that shouldn't. But why are our personal tastes even a valid baseline for another person's? Just imagine for an instant if you were the foremost expert in evaluating and judging orange juice. And you went in and the most expensive and the best orange juice in the world was the first orange juice you tasted, and you had brushed your teeth about half an hour before. How would you rate that orange juice? How would you rate that orange juice if it was then at the end of the tasting experience? It's a very subjective and changing dynamic. Our body chemistry is not static. Our perceptions of taste and flavor are not static either. Not only that, but imagine our medium rare steak au poivre with roasted carrots. We can find a wine to work on the filet. We can find a different wine that's going to match the pepper and the fat and the cream sauce. And maybe if there's a herb rub on those carrots, we can find a wine to work within that herb rub. Which one should we pick? So is it hopeless? Maybe. But I think we can provide you with some tools to help you navigate through this wilderness and potentially make a pleasant experience for a stranger. For those who have been through the WSET certifications, you'll be familiar with the pairing concepts in level 1 and level 2 according to a dish's sweet, salty, bitter, or umami components. If you haven't done this, if you came through the SWE, which doesn't include tasting as part of their curriculum, you should do this experiment on your own. Do a simple component exercise with red pepper flakes, salt, sugar, lemons, apples, something sweet, and try them with a range of different wines at the same time to see how they work, what works and what doesn't work. A glass of wine and an entree served in a restaurant have similar foundations. They have saltiness, they have sweetness, they have viscosity or body, they have bitterness. Now what you're going to find with this component exercise is a couple of things. Salt. Salt is your friend. Salt, the right amount of salt, generally makes all wines taste a little bit better. Try it with a little muscadet or even with a California rich red blend. Now sugar is not your friend. You usually want the wine to be sweeter than the dish. Sweetness in food enhances the tannins and the bitterness. The dryness and acidity in wine increase with sugar in food. Now that said, there are a lot of wines that are very much sweeter than they appear due to the presence of alcohol. Many popular big name wines have quite high 15-17% RS and are considered dry by the drinking public. This gives the ability for these high RS wines to actually work with desserts where a standard old world red wouldn't have a chance. Now acid. Acid is more of a fair weather friend. Acid in food generally moderates acid perception in wine. Ends up making the wine richer and smoother. Lower acid wines with acid in food can make those wines taste flat and heavy on the palate. But then again, sometimes you can squeeze a lemon into a flabby California Chardonnay and it actually brings the wine into balance because it lacks the acidity in the first place. Now, umami in food will amplify bitterness, tannin, and acidity in wine. Luckily, umami doesn't tend to exist without salt or fat or acid to help it out. If you're curious what MSG feels like, because it is almost more of a texture or a tactile response, get a little MSG, put it in your mouth, feel it on your tongue, and try wine with it. You'll know exactly what umami is. That said, certain sweeter wines, moderate acid, can go toe-to-toe with umami. Now, there are sulfur compounds in foods like Brussels sprouts and asparagus that could pretty much destroy a wine in your mouth while you're drinking it. Surprisingly, high acid, low aromatic muscadet, and at the other end of the spectrum, a dry, full-bodied sherry, Fino sherry, can actually work with those sulfur compounds and not be destroyed. Fat is almost always welcome at the party. More of a texture like umami than a flavor, that cloying oiliness in your mouth can be lifted away, brought back into the solution by an acidic wine. Fat will also act as a counterpoint to tannin's drying effect in the mouth. While a sweet wine doesn't usually help fat, there is a hedonistic, gluttonous pleasure that comes from drinking Sauterne and eating foie gras. It's definitely delicious, but after about 5 bites, it can become a struggle. Now, beyond the individual components in food or wine, there are 2 concepts that can be valuable in creating food and wine pairings. One is complement versus contrast, and the other is my body and likes your body. It's often beneficial to match the body of food with the body of wine. You have to realize that food is almost always dominant in this relationship. Food brings a tactile, physical presence in your mouth that wine can't quite overcome a lot of times. Food is much more dangerous to wine than wine is to food. Now, in the complement versus contrast, wine has similar components to food. Both have body or weight. There is acid and sweetness, there's tannin, bitterness, and there's also texture. Matching components together results in complementing pairings, which tend to accentuate that particular component. Contrasts can either blend or harmonize components. It's almost similar to the way that musical notes at different octaves can be more enjoyable to the ear than on their own. Now, a really good example of the complement versus contrast pairing is the tawny port and blue cheese. Both tawny port and blue cheese have intense flavors, big body flavors. There's nothing that hits your palate quite like either one of them. Now, while they have complementing body, they have very contrasting dominant flavors. The blue cheese with its salty pungency, and the tawny port with an intense sweetness. This contrasting bitter and sweet brings the port's sweetness down a notch while also softening the blue cheese's salty bitterness. They are both better for the contrast, but it only works because the body is in harmony. The idea of pairing to a protein is a common fallacy as well, because the exact same protein can have dramatic differences depending on cooking technique or sauces being applied. What you need to do is find which aspect of the dish is most dominant and pair the wine to that. It could be the sauce, it could be the cooking technique, it could be something on the side, or it could be the protein. It's up to you to find out and match that component to the wine. The spices in a rub can end up leading the show, with the protein just acting as a delivery vehicle. Now, salad courses have never traditionally been paired with wine. They act as a palate break. There are very few wines that can stand up to a vinegar-based dressing. One of the few we found is a Kremstal Wachau high-quality Gruner Veltliner. Something about the black pepper notes that it brings and that high acid, it can work with salad. Another good pairing that has less to do with flavors and more to do with texture is the champagne and popcorn, or champagne and fried chicken pairing. This pair is all about a neutral protein with both fat and texture in the coating, where the acid in the bubbles eats through the fat, and the tactile mouthfeel of the bubbly is nice with the crunchiness. Plus you've got the salt in there. Another classic pairing is muscadet with oysters. Now, the reason this pairing works so well is that usually when you're having oysters, fairly mild flavor, you're adding lemon juice. What's better than lemon juice, has almost the same amount of acidity? Muscadet. This pairing is almost more about the salty brine of the oysters reacting with the muscadet than it is about the oyster itself. That salt softens the austere acidity of the muscadet and brings out just a little sweetness that works with the richness, but very mild richness, of the oyster. Now, some of the worst pairings that you're going to find are the regional pairings that are gone awry. For example, there are countless books out there that will try to tell you that herby tomato sauce and Chianti are a pairing, good pairing. You'll often hear that if it grows together, it goes together. That is a pretty good baseline for developing pairings. The challenge is you have to realize that central Italy and southern Italy aren't together. Many of us probably don't know that Italy was only put together as a country after the US was put together. Understanding the food that is actually served in Chianti or the food that is served in the Piedmont, those are the wines, those are the foods that will go with the wines. You can't lump Italy together for a pairing.